In this video, we're going to talk about why stretching doesn't always work for hip impingement and what you can do about it. I'm Matt Shue from Upright Health, and I'm joined today by my buddy
Shane from GotRom.com.
Today we're going to be talking about stretching and how it relates to you if you've been told you have hip impingement or femoroacetabular impingement. When you've been told you have hip impingement, you're often told that you need to try stretching. And the reality is sometimes stretching is a fantastic tool to help you feel better and move better. But there are also cases where stretching makes things worse. So we want to talk about how you can tell the difference and what you can do about it.
If you've been told that you have FAI or hip impingement, usually one of the first things you think of doing or you're told you should do is stretch. Stretch your hip flexors is usually kind of the universal advice for almost everything. But working with a lot of people who have FAI now, we find that that is good for some and bad for others. So I'm going to get in position and show you where some people are at. Some people get into this position and they go into a stretch and they already feel a huge stretch right here, and it feels muscular. It feels like, okay, this is something that should be stretched. For that person, just breathing and relaxing into this stretch over time and lengthening that muscle is a good idea. There's other people who go into this position and they can immediately just go into a lot of hip extension, and that person probably doesn't need to stretch very much here. There's also a third category of person who gets into position and it just feels just painful and uncomfortable and pinchy and sharp, and they feel like almost like they're bonking into the front of their hip capsule here. And for that person, it's not necessarily they shouldn't stretch at all. Maybe they just need a little bit more of an active stretch.
Using the muscles in that position.
So if I was going to go and become more active in this hip flexor stretch, what I would do is I'd come into a lunge type position and I would put my hands here, crunch down so that I'm not arching my low back, which is usually a compensation for hip flexor stretching. So I crunch, my hands are here, my glute is squeezed so there's an activity in this stretch, and then I can drop into a little bit of hip extension. This, for some people, will often turn this stretch, which felt uncomfortable and sharp and kind of just not right, and they're like, okay, now with a little bit more activity, this feels better. You also can turn this into a strength exercise where you actually hold dumbbells in your hands, or in an advanced version, a bar on your back, and you keep your back leg straight, ribs down, butt squeezed, and you do kind of lunges, and then you're building strength while you're creating length.
The reason we're cueing to keep the ribs down is because sometimes people will go into the stretch and then flare their rib cage up and get a huge curve in their lower back, and their pelvis is now into a big anterior tilt and they're not really getting the stretch where we want them to. So cueing the ribs down often helps people keep this flat. But if you're already really kyphotic up here, meaning you just live in a hunchback all the time already, you may not find much benefit from that. You may need to just really work on firing the glutes and just focusing on feeling the low back stay flat and that pelvis tucked down. If you have trouble feeling that, you could take a hand and just put it on your back and just kind of feel, where are you positioning your lower back? Is it going into that big curve, or are you able to keep it flat? What we're getting at is sometimes stretching isn't what's necessary. If you're somebody who's really flexible, really mobile, then sometimes you just need to build strength and control in different angles and positions. For example, I worked with somebody who was doing yoga a lot for many years, and she could go into a really wide middle split position without any problem at all. But what would happen was her hips would pop and they'd feel unstable all of the time. So what she needed to do was actually build strength in the muscles that stabilized that position for her. So I'm going to show you an example of this with Shane here as my beautiful yoga model. And he's just going to go out with his feet wide, and instead of just kind of passively trying to let all these muscles relax in the inner thigh, what he can do instead is actually think about bringing his feet towards each other. Now he can do this by emphasizing heels coming in just a little bit more than the toes to emphasize that external rotation function that his adductors are going to contribute to. So he's trying to actively engage his adductors in this lengthened position. Once he feels like he has that control in that position, he can, if he wants, go into a wider and wider position. So with that yoga practitioner that I was talking to, she could go super, super wide, but she found it very difficult to engage these inner thigh muscles at those positions. So over time, she's just built up that strength, and what you can do and what Shane's doing is just working on building up that strength and control so that these positions feel safe. This is what strength at end range looks like. Once you have used active stretching techniques to control your end ranges, you can feel comfortable in a lot of different positions. So if you're thinking about stretching and you've been told you have hip impingement, remember to keep these ideas in mind. You want to control things, not just necessarily stretch things until they're floppy and loose. You want to be active and controlled. If you are looking for helpful links to help you get out of hip pain, be sure to check out the description box below, and remember to subscribe to our channel. And as always, remember, pain sucks.
Life shouldn't.
We're just thinking with the ribs down.